Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talkin Fire. We've got a very special edition of the podcast. We're doing kind of an information session on the National Fire Academy. If you're tuned into this, by now you know there's been some stoppage to what goes on at the National Fire Academy last week. It looks like it's going to continue for a little while the current administration looks into some things at the NFA. Well, I wanted to look into some things too, and I wanted to look into the value and benefits it brings to the communities that the NFA serves, which is really the North American and beyond fire service. And to do that, I put together a panel of folks that have a lot of connection to the NFA and a lot of insight as what the NFA does. So I'm certain that, again, if you're dialed in at all, you recognize all of our participants today. But I'll introduce them. Someone I've known for probably a decade, Dr. Denis Onieal, former superintendent, National Fire Academy, U.S. Fire Administrator, Deputy U.S. Fire Administrator. Welcome. Glad you're here. Chief Marc Bashoor, 45 or 6 years in the fire service, an institution himself, was a late addition this morning, and I'm so grateful you're here. Friend of a friend of a friend, and that's what the fire service is. And for me, that's what the NFA does. Assistant Chief Chad Costa as well. If you're at all dialed into the fire service on social media and LinkedIn especially, you know who Chief Costa is, and you know the value that his content brings each and every day. And that's what all three of these panelists do. They show up for the fire service each and every day. And I know when they retire at the end of the evening and they put their head on the pillow, there's no doubt if they made a difference in the fire service that day. And I'm certain of that. So with that, we're going to go around the horn. And if I could, and we'll start with Dr. Onieal, if we can just find out kind of what your connection to the NFA is, why it makes sense that you're here talking about the National Fire Academy.
Well, Dean, thanks for the opportunity. And the principal reason that I'm here talking is because the superintendent is going to be restricted on what he can say and not say in public about what's going on. Because, if you work in the executive branch of the government, you're expected to follow the president's policies. So I'm going to be saying things that are truthful, but things that he probably couldn't say or wouldn't be allowed to say in public. I started at the National Fire Academy in 1995. I was the first career superintendent to be appointed to that job. Prior to that, it was a presidential appointment. At the time, the National Fire Academy was training 15,000 people a year. And today it's trained about 60,000 a year. It kind of dropped off because of COVID, and they're getting the residential program back up. When I got there, there were a whole host of things that I viewed that were important to do. One was to make sure that the organization, all of our courses received outside evaluation, and now all of the courses taught by the NFA receive college credit recommendation at either the bachelor's or the master's degree program. We worked with 100 or so colleges and universities around the country to standardize curriculum for the bachelor's and master's degree programs. And that's ongoing. Our executive fire officer program recently, and this is just something I saw on social media, had 500 applications for 150 seats in the executive fire officer program. But I think the most important thing for folks to understand about the National Fire Academy is that the equivalent is the War College for generals and admirals in the military, where they bring together very high-ranking men and women from different branches of the military to get them to work together to defend our country. And most people understand that concept. But with regard to the National Fire Academy, we're not in a war, but our military is still doing this. We are currently in a war. If you look at the wildland fires in Los Angeles, California, the wildland fires going on in North and South Carolina, and today, a most recent news article about wildfires in Long Island, we're in the middle of warfare right now. And these aren't fires, these are conflagrations. These are modern day conflagrations. Now, if you look at the history of the fire service, conflagrations are what started career fire departments and volunteer fire departments in the country. So it's important to understand that the National Fire Academy is an opportunity to bring the brightest and the best men and women from all around the country to get specialized training in leadership, management, and technical arenas, hazardous materials, fire investigation, that they can't get anywhere else. And that's the benefit.
Thank you, Mark. I'm sure you've got, I'm sure you're share Dr. Onieal, some of Dr. Onieal's opinions, but your connection to the NFA is probably a little different than his. And what is it? What is your connection, and why do you bring value to this conversation?
Yeah. So why I bring value, I guess that's going to be up to Dr. Onieal to flesh out in the end. We'll see how that goes. But I absolutely want to thank you for having me on here and having somebody like Dr. Onieal who has sat in that chair before as part of the podcast is invaluable. So Doc, I want to thank you for joining his Dean's podcast. So my connection with the National Fire Academy is completely as a student. Well, not completely. I'd say it's 90% as a student. Beyond the student opportunities that I've taken there over the last 40 years, has also been working with the Fallen Firefighters Foundation and helping in those programs, especially with the weekend that goes on there. And then finally, as one program, there was a new fire chief program. I was in part of the cadre of instructors when that program first came out. So I think we all have some kind of connection, but I also think it's important as we go on and we talk about this is for everybody to recognize the National Fire Academy is not just in Emmitsburg, Maryland. It's in all 50 states through a connection with the state training academies for all 50 states. The National Fire Academy is everywhere. So while Emmitsburg is that hub, and Emmitsburg is what everybody thinks about, we're really talking about something that's directly impacting all 50 states. And, that is where we're all connected to the academy is through our state academies and the programs that we're doing here in our own states.
And Chief, thank you for bringing that up because that is something that, and I don't want to say that I forget because I don't. I work for the Fire Academy here in Massachusetts, and one of my colleagues is responsible for our connection with the NFA, and we offer as many programs as we can, obviously through the relationship we have with the NFA. So they're in quite a bit, and it's awesome. But everybody doesn't always think of that. We don't always think of, that because we think of the epicenter, right, which is Emmitsburg, but we don't think of all the programs that reach out, and then of course all the online programs as well. Right. Some which are guided, and some are self-paced, and the resources those are for firefighters across the nation. So. Chief Costa, the only person on the podcast from the West Coast, and that wasn't by design, it was just by luck, I guess. So, your connection, let's cover your connection. And if you could you talk about the EFO program a little? You're an EFO grad, so if we could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for having me on. I want to share a quick story because it was ironic when you reached out asking if I'd jump on here. So last night I took my children to a Golden State Warriors game, and prior to the game, my phone buzzed and I look, and it's a student that I graduated the EFO with, and I hadn't talked to him in a couple months, but he reached out and simply just said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And started a conversation, a back and forth that went into not only talking about life, but also some paramedic challenges and some things that his organization is going through, asking for my opinions or if I had experienced the same challenges. And I'll just share that because that's what the EFO is meant to me. It's meant a group of individuals across the country that reach out or I reach out to often, whether it be personal, relationships, or whether it be fire service related. And I think that's really the core of what the EFO is meant for me is just to get outside that, get up on that balcony as they would say, or get outside your box and get to know people and get to see how things are being done across the country. It was an amazing experience and one that I advocate for and have sent. I've been lucky, like you mentioned, in the West Coast. It doesn't seem like there's that many people on the West Coast that even know about the NFA. There's a lot of most of my career growing up, I didn't even know anything about it really. until later on, and until I was exposed to some people that had went. So my point being is, for me, it's just those relationships and the growth that I've had since going through that program.
Yeah, and Chief, I got to tell you that, like, I didn't realize the value of the NFA until it was 2013, my first 6-day trip down Emmitsburg, and Dr. Onieal is a superintendent, and I know that the current superintendent does the same, but makes the round into the classroom and says hello and welcomes, and truly makes you feel welcome at the National Fire Academy. But then also made sure we knew to kind of spread the word, right? Just spread the word, share the wealth, not only the things you're learning, but about the experiences you're having. And I know that's proven valuable for some of my peers. And I wouldn't have a podcast. I probably wouldn't have a job if it wasn't for some of the folks that I've met through the NFA, through my experiences at the NFA. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the value the NFA brings to the folks that attend. So, we've talked about connection, but the value for the people, firefighters, fire officers, fire chief officers, and then the benefits for them. So, like them in the fire departments, and then we'll talk about the public in just a few minutes. But let's talk first about the value the NFA brings to firefighters, fire officers, and departments. And if we want to go right around the order, if you three all know each other a little bit better than I know you, so if you all want to interrupt each other and stuff, you do you. How about that? But we'll start with Dr. Onieal. Um, I just want to say this too, that I did reach out to the current superintendent, and he was very kind in his remarks back. And I had met him a few different times, and he thanked me for the opportunity. But I knew how that was going to go. Right? We all know that we all work for somebody, and that's respectable as well. But he wished us well. So how about that? So yeah, value and benefit.
Dean, there's a couple of things to consider, but I think the first thing is that if you think about the fire service individual, whether that's in a firefighter or an officer going up through the ranks, if they stay insulated in their own department, the best they're going to be, hopefully, is the best person in their department. And sometimes we don't always have the best person. Who is as I like to say, that SMRT. They're not that smart. So what you want to do is to become a professional, to improve your own department and your own community, is to get out of that department, get out of that area, and go someplace where you're in a classroom with men and women, again, from all over the country, and you're exposed to new ideas, things that you never thought of, things that you never heard of, and unique solutions to problems that you're struggling with. As you point out, Dean, I'm sorry, as you pointed out, Chad, you have a contact list in your cell phone of men and women around the country who, if you're dealing with a challenge, a big problem, you've got 15 people you can call up and get some ideas about. And this all goes back to, and I don't want to be wax philosophic here, but I need to, and that's a story that Plato wrote in his book, The Republic, and it's called The Allegory of the Caves. And it's a story about men and women who are chained to a wall in a cave. And there's a flyer behind them, and they're looking at a wall, and all they see on the wall is shadows going back and forth. That's their reality. And finally, somebody breaks free of the chains and walks outside the cave. And of course, it's a man, he walks outside, and his eyes are not used to the light. He's never seen sunlight. So he's kind of feeling around, he's blinded. And everybody inside the cave is saying, oh, see, he left the cave, he's blind. After a few minutes, his eyesight adjusts and he looks around and he sees trees and rivers and flowers and animals and all of these things, other human beings. And he realizes that his reality is not what's going on in the cave, that this is reality. So he walks back into the cave. And of course, again, his eyes have a tough time adjusting to the darkness, and he's feeling around, and everybody's still screaming, oh, see, he's blind, he left the cave. But he's trying to convince them that no, what you're seeing on the wall isn't reality. And nobody believes him. Okay. And nothing ever improves. So it's important for fire folks to get out of their cave, to get out of their firehouse, to get out of their fire headquarters, and go someplace else where they see different things and learn different things so that they can take them back and improve their own department and improve their own community and reduce the risks that their communities face. But the reality is, oh, hold on, I'm sorry. The reality of it is that sometimes it's hard to bring back the new ideas. But I mean, that's the principal purpose of a National Fire Academy, is to share these ideas and learn these new theories.
Very true.
True, true. Chief Bashoor, we'll let you build again on Dr. Onieal's comments and thinking about the value, right? I mean, like obviously that's, I don't want to say right, like everyone could just say, well, he stole the answer, because really the best answer is that, right? We all know those departments that are amazing departments almost, and the almost is the fact that they train their own. They train their own. They train their own officers. They train their own, whatever, right? And they grow up in this environment where they think they're great, and they're good, and they are good, but they solve their problems the same way they did in 1950, and they think that's okay.
Yeah, and I want to hit before
Yeah,
make me lose train of mountains. As you get older, that kind of crap happens, right? But the key that you just said there was they all train their people. And what the National Fire Academy provides is that framework that they don't have at the local level necessarily. They have NFPA, they have guidelines, they have all the different things there. But we have demonstrated, have demonstrated time after time after time that the 50 states deal with training certifications. They deal with firefighting operations differently. They deal with staffing numbers differently. They all have a different way of looking at it. And one of the big values I see from the National Fire Academy is it provides that national framework, that all 50 of those states can come together and hopefully come to some consensus on how we should do things and what we should do. But then also the theoretical levels, as Doc Onieal talks, waxing philosophically, the theory of things they'll get out of the National Fire Academy that they'll never get at their local firehouse, at least not to that depth. And then, not to mention, and Chad, I hope I don't take away from your piece here, but not to mention the monetary value, for folks to be able to attend classes like they have access to at the National Fire Academy would be an expensive proposition without the National Fire Academy. And our ability to put those programs on and to provide that framework that can spread across the 50 states would be extremely limited without that framework that the Fire Academy provides.
that's a great point. Chief Costa, your thoughts on it?
Yeah. And I'm not going to repeat the completely accurate things that are said. So I was just sitting here thinking about a different perspective, at least from me. And that is the affirmation of what I was trying to do in my agency or in the county that I work in, and all the efforts that I had put into what I thought were things or initiatives or things that were positive leadership challenges that we're going through, or whether it be responding to different types of incidents in your communities or some type of risk reduction, whatever, EMS, whatever the issues were, the things that I was trying to attack. And specifically for me, it was more about changing culture and the leadership traits and the things that I believed in. When I went back to the National Fire Academy, it was quite refreshing to go across the country and have chiefs from Philadelphia, chiefs from all over Ohio, Texas, they're talking about and teaching some of the things that I had believed in and that I had been trying to enact back in my own communities. And for me, that was an amazing feeling to know that I wasn't crazy, and know that those things that I was trying to do for my organization were actually agreed upon across the country, and something that that they were advocating for. So I just wanted to share that perspective. Is sometimes it's not all about what you're doing wrong or what it opens your eyes to. It might be what you're doing right.
Uh, Yeah, and that's and Dr. O'Neill almost said the R word earlier. He almost said Rolodex, and he changed that to get to contact list in the phone. But it improves that Rolodex of those folks you call, right? That list of people you call that either validate that you're on the right track, or at least that validate your problems aren't unique. That whole we're all battling sometimes the same fires at the firehouse, and that can often just bring some calm to your mind, right? Is that okay? We're all doing the same stuff, or somebody's walked this path before, and they can show me a little bit of the way. And I think that's a massive value. I went through the pictures that I've taken at the NFA over the, I don't know, 10 different weeks I've been there or whatnot. And there's some funny ones I take every time. There's still a corded pay telephone outside the auditorium that I get a kick of. Actually, it's gone now, but that I, for years, just thought was funny. But, there's pictures of the Command Post Pub. There's pictures from the VFW. There's a picture of me and some locals, military veterans up at the Legion Hall and, in the outhouse and stuff. And yeah, those are unique to the Emmetsburg, right? Not necessarily everywhere. But I know that when people travel to 6-day classes at their state training facility, I know they're also getting immersed in that. And they're down maybe at the local restaurant, even if it's a chain, sitting around, maybe passing some Coke Zero, or maybe passing some hops and barley, whatever it is. And they're talking about the great American fire service, and they're talking about the challenges. And that's the value that the NFA brings. It provides that, as Marc said, a national framework, and a national framework for a lot of things. And sometimes that's just a national framework for fellowship and camaraderie, and it's the great unifier. I think we all know that being a firefighter is special. And when we tell people we're a firefighter, there's a connection that happens immediately. And there's a rapport, right? It gets to us, the rapport spot. So now that we've talked about the value it can bring to people, to firefighters, and thus their organizations, if we're talking to my folks or to, my family, my friends that aren't firefighters, and if they say, Dean, do you really need this thing? I mean, and they start talking about how many firefighters they heard are in the country, and then, well, it only trains about 60,000. Is it really worth the investment? What are some things we can say back to that when we think about the investment? And I think that, we've covered some of that at our level, at the firefighter level. But what is that to the public? How does that translate to value for them when maybe they call 911, or when they show up at a community event and the fire department, EMS providers are represented there? What is the value that brings to them in that case? We'll go around the horn again on that one.
Thanks, Dean. There's a couple of things that come to mind. And I think it would begin with a story about 9/11 in New York City. And I was sent up there on the 12th of September to work behind the scenes to assist the FDNY in reestablishing their systems of command, control, and communication. And I loved the New York City Fire Department. I was the next department over in Jersey City. We were directly across the river from one another, 3,000 feet apart. Many of my professors in college were New York City Fire Department officers. But what New York City Fire Department learned during that event was that they were not used to these massive multi-day events. New York City had 13,000 firefighters. No matter what kind of fire they had, they could stamp it out with the number of people that they had. But they did not have a system in place to operate in the same place for 30 days and 40 days, these massive operations. And they realized it and started to come down to the National Fire Academy and learned about the incident command system and multi-agency response and all of those things. And now they are not only acolytes of the study, but they're proselytizers. They're going all over the country, helping other fire departments come better at dealing with these mass casualty events and disasters. The other thing that a community doesn't realize and will never realize is the number of fires and I should say first, the number of lives that have been saved and the numbers of fires that have been prevented because of the training that these men and women have had at the National Fire Academy. They get this global look at a community. They begin to think about, very simple thoughts. What's the most dangerous building in any community? It's a hospital. High energy, radiation, biological, chemicals, gases, labyrinths of a building that have been added on and nobody can get around. The occupants are incapable of self-evacuation, not enough staff to help them all get out. And, hospitals are all over the place. So nobody thinks of that, and, just recently they had a terrible hospital fire up in Brockton, Massachusetts. They had to evacuate, I think, 160 or 180 patients in February in Brockton, Massachusetts. It took 90 ambulances. Where do you get, if I was to wake you up in the middle of the night and say, where are you going to get 90 ambulances? Well, if they plan for that, that's what the National Fire Academy does. It helps men and women understand these are the challenges you may face. And you better start planning, you better start preventing, you better start educating.
And that's right. Like, that's so true, is that the community, the value it brings to the community, I guess, like a lot of the things we do, the community will never know if we bring the value. If you've got a great CRR program, a community risk reduction program, and you practice the 5 E's, like, you don't have incidents. There's non-events, and when there's non-events, the public doesn't know. Chief Bashoor, how do we make sure the community? What value are we bringing to the community, the NFA?
I think the community thinks about the fire department in intrinsic ways. Right, the value is in the fire department. And really the value is in the service that we provide, whether it's directly service at the local level or whether it is the command and coordination that you just heard Doc Onieal talk about. That command and coordination doesn't happen by happenstance. It happens through training. And someone asked me yesterday for an interview, they said, are we going to see immediate disasters because the National Fire Academy closed? And I had to say, no, we're not going to see immediate disasters. What you get out of the National Fire Academy is that wealth of development and career development and organizational capacity building that you're not going to get on your own. So my own medical situation, and Doc's very familiar with, I was in very good shape when I had a collapsed lung. I had a collapsed lung that the doctors told me most people would have died from. Had I not been in good shape, if my body didn't have the capacity to recover, I wouldn't be here today. It's the same thing in the fire departments. We have a certain amount of capacity within the fire departments to run the situations that we run every day and to conduct our business the way we do it every day, because that's who we are, it's what we do. But we do it under that framework that the National Fire Academy helps us learn from. If the National Fire Academy goes away, sooner or later, we begin to break down. So it becomes a symbiotic relationship that a lot of people won't understand immediately. They'll think, oh, see, we closed it down and nothing happened. And the reality is that every day we don't have an academy is another day that we begin to come a little bit farther down on the ladder of our capacity to develop and our capacity to improve. So I think we're probably all going to say the same thing, that it's more about that value of development that the academy provides us to help serve our communities better and at the highest levels we can, that we just wouldn't have individually.
That's such a great point, right? That every time we take our foot off the throttle on something, we run the risk of it coming back, right? So, for instance, when I was younger in the 80s, seatbelts were all the conversation. Every conversation was around seatbelts and seatbelt law and making sure people wore their seatbelts. And that conversation isn't as alive and well today. Now I know what the hope is. The hope is that I wear my seatbelt and that I convey that to my son, and he conveys that on and on. At some point in time, we will have another campaign about seatbelts. It will be cyclical because we've taken our foot off the throttle on that one. We don't spread that message as well, and we've replaced it with other also vitally important messages. But the same will happen if we take our foot off the throttle of the NFA right now, even for another day or a week or a month, or we reduce capacity, and we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes, or we reduce capacity, we will feel that. Chief Costa, let's get your thoughts on the value we bring to communities, and then I want to talk a little bit about what's it look like, after the NFA. So why don't we start with the value it brings communities?
Yeah, no problem. I'm batting cleanup here, so there's just so many good things said. So I'm just kind of sitting back and thinking about what I can add to this conversation. So I thought of a couple things. One is when you say 60,000, I believe is what you said a year. Uh, it it's so much more than that. I can think of 2 to 3 off the top of my head initiatives that I brought back from the academy, whether it be from cohort students or instructors on ideas or things that they've done in their communities. Uh, there's multiple people. I think we're up to 3 or 4 in our organization that have gone back to the academy since I've gone. So that was, I'm sure, me being there empowered them to take that leap. There's multiple agencies in the county that have reached out to me in the state that have enacted some of the initiatives that we've done in Petaluma. So I guess what I'm saying is it might be 60, but the number is tenfold that in the exposure that you bring back from the academy and what you learn about yourself, your organization, and your community. So the community may not know it, but what I'm saying is that directly in the community I work in has been directly affected by things that I've learned from people or the institution.
Fair. And to be fair to you, you have batted cleanup here now in 2 rounds. So
I like it.
we're gonna talk a little bit about, well, it does make things easy. And like for me,
Yeah.
a panel discussion is super easy because I don't have to really provide any value. I let you bring the value. Why don't we'll go the other way around the horn here. We'll start with
Good
you,
idea.
Chief Costa, on this one.
Give Chad a
Um,
break.
yeah, and
You do so well though. Now
we'll let
now I'm getting nervous.
So in your opinion, looking at this from the West Coast, what's it look like without the NFA? What does that site
Yeah.
picture look like? And we'll say you can answer it in 2 ways, right? You can either say without an NFA, I don't think that's any reality that would happen, but without it, and then maybe even reduce capacity. What are your thoughts on what that looks like for us as a American fire service?
Yeah, I mean, I just got to circle back to my own experiences, and I can't. For most of my career, I lived in a really tight box. I had no idea. I had no idea. I look back and self-reflect in those first 2 weeks in the academy when you do it's all about self. It's probably the most impactful 2 weeks that I've ever had in my 26 years of the fire service. Like it was life changing. Just the ability of those, they don't call them instructors, they call them facilitators, but the ability of those facilitators in that course to just turn you inside out. And it was tough. There was tough moments. There were tears shed and frustrations, but in the end, when we walked out of there, I was a completely different person as far as, not only as a human being, but also as a leader in the fire service. So for me, what's scary is if it's not there, where do we get that exposure? Where do we get outside of our silos? Because, like you said about the seatbelt, example, I just see us going back into that, and I guarantee you, I wouldn't be the leader, the fire assistant fire chief that I am today without that exposure. So that's my fear is just the siloing effect.
Mm. It's I'm not gonna lie, it's depressing me a little to even think deeply about this. When I wrote the question down and thought, well, we're going to talk about this, I didn't, I thought in my own mind of some things, but to hear other people, it becomes an even deeper concern of mine. Chief Bashoor, what's your?
Yeah, so same line. And Dean, I want to remind you, I've got a 3:45
Yep.
hard stop.
Oh yeah, I'm looking at that clock. Don't worry. Thank you.
So I think the biggest fear, if you will, for me is that if it were to go away, and I don't want to think it'll go away. I don't think it will. Is that we lose what we've at least built in the last 3 years in that one voice that Dr. Lori Moore helped us build. That we begin to lose that one voice of the way we speak, the way we train, the way we prepare, you name it. And I think one of the things that Dr. Onieal talked about in the beginning was when he came in just prior, it was a presidential appointment. And, and Doc, correct me if I'm wrong on the way I say this, okay? But at one point, the U.S. Fire Administrator was a presidential appointee. So in the line of succession, actually, right, of the president, that it was a cabinet level position, essentially. Then it became nested under FEMA, and then that became nested under DHS. So the U.S. Fire Administration as a whole, we've been riding this roller coaster. And I want to say that right now, this is just another part of the roller coaster, and that we're going to find where we settle. We may not settle the way it was. We may not, let's be honest, we may not have a FEMA. We may not have a DHS. Who knows what we'll have? I don't think that anybody can answer that question right now. But I think we as a fire service need to make sure that we're focusing our efforts on service right now and not on, and I'm not demeaning your question at all, not on the woe is us, we're going to lose the U.S. Fire Administration or National Fire Academy. Yeah, we got to think about that. But more importantly for me, as a local fire chief, I need our folks, well, as a retired local fire chief, I need our folks to focus on service. And I need our folks to focus on doing the right things every time, every day, every alarm, and let the politics stay where the politics need to stay. Don't bring them to the job, number one. Don't bring the politics of all this to the job, but let the politicians and the chiefs that have to deal with the politicians, let them do that. The chiefs need to be working this and need to be, I know you're going to be asking the question of what can people do. The chiefs need to be part of the solution to this. And some part of that is talking with your elected officials, not talking at them, talking with them and explaining how the National Fire Academy becomes the preeminent force that it is. I mean, let's face it, we have one of the best fire services in the world. And one of the reasons we have that best fire service in the world mentality, if you will, is because of the National Fire Academy. And without that, we begin to lose that cream of the crop look. And it's not just a look, but that we begin to lose that. And when you begin to lose the look, you begin to lose the whole process. And that's just not something we want to see. Like I said earlier, we've demonstrated 50 different ways of states looking at things. That's the last thing I want to see us going back to is 50 different ways of training and 50 different ways of looking at this framework. Fires burn the same in my backyard as they do in Chad's and as they do in Doc's. They really do burn the same. The only thing that's different is our environments. So I think having the National Fire Academy or not having the National Fire Academy, we need to focus on service right now. Make sure that our firefighters get that message loud and clear. This politics needs to stay in the political world and not in the 911 world.
Excellent. That's a great reminder, and it probably should be said a lot more often about a lot more topics. Dr. Onieal, what's it look like reduced or?
I want real quick for you.
Yeah.
BAFTK. BAFTK. Those that follow me know exactly what I'm saying. Back away from the keyboard. If I can give folks any advice out of this entire process right now and the politics that are going around, BAFTK. Take a second and just back away from the keyboard.
Fair.
Thank you.
Hopefully you got another couple minutes. Dr. Onieal, What's it look like? And then segue right into what people can do
Okay.
because Chief Bashoor is on a limited time. I want to wrap this. So
And I'm not going to disagree with my colleague Mark because he and I go back up many, many moons. A couple of things. First of all, anyone who studies engineering knows the concept called entropy. And that's when a system does not interact with its environment, that it stays insulated and focused on itself. So you take any fire department that is not exposed to new ideas, not exposed to new training, they are just going to deteriorate and deteriorate and deteriorate because the best person is only going to be as good as the best person in front of them or ahead of them in the chain of command. And if you wanted to take a medical model metaphor, you know, if a doctor went to a medical school and stayed in one hospital and never went out and took a seminar or got any additional training, I mean, we'd still be bleeding people that's how they killed George Washington. So it's important for people to get out of their cave, get out of their hospital, get out of their environment, out of their fire department, and expose themselves to new ideas, to the latest and the greatest. And that's why the National Fire Academy is so important. Now, where I'm going to disagree a little bit with my friend Chief Bashoor is that we can't just let the fire chiefs take the responsibility for this. Everybody needs to make sure that their congressmen and senators know how they feel. The men and women that they send to Washington, D.C. work for them. And unfortunately, sadly, we lost recently Congressman Bill Pasquarello from New Jersey, and just a few years ago, Senator John McCain, who were just diehard supporters for the fire service, not just the National Fire Academy, but the fire service in general. And that's how the government works. Now I'm going to let everybody in on a secret. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson's father, was a firefighter. He was a volunteer firefighter, was disabled at a fire. And the Speaker of the House controls the budget. That's how it works in our government. And I've did 25 years in federal service. I know what works and I know what doesn't work. What works is for people to engage with their elected officials and make sure they know how they feel, where they stand on an issue. As Mark said, you don't have to be rude. You don't have to talk at them. You need to talk with them or send them a letter, whatever it is works for you. But the old story, the only thing that requires evil to triumph is for people to sit back and do nothing. And it will change. I've seen it change. I've witnessed it change. I've felt it changed. Get involved, make a phone call, write a letter, let them know.
thank you, Dr. Onieal. I don't know that there can be any more of a call to action than that. Chief Bashoor, do you think there's anything more? Chief Costa, do you think there's anything more that we can say regarding what people should do beyond what Dr. Onieal has just told us?
I think that we need to keep the foot on the throttle, like you know, the example you used, and it's not just a right now thing. The organization that I would ask people to look up and become involved in if they're not is the Congressional Fire Services Institute. So when we talk long term, a lot of what we're talking about here will be things that CFSI, the Congressional Fire Service Institute, deals with at the macro level. And I sit on that National Advisory Committee with that. Doc, I think you're actually a part of the group as well. We deal with a lot of these problems at that upper end, and becoming involved with CFSI is a great way for people to get their foot in the door, to get their foot in the Capitol when we do the Hill Day, and we're there actually talking about issues and making sure that we're seen, we're visible, they know who we are. That's a great way to do it professionally and with your cohorts. I don't really think there's anything else that I could say right here that is, you know what, here's another call to action. Doc said it, just your congressmen need to hear from you. They need to know that, you know, that we'd be hurting without this. My only admonition is I need someone answering calls, and
Fair.
I need the service being addressed on the street. And I don't want everybody so hyper focused on this upper level politics that my service is suffering.
Chief Costa, sorry.
I've got, okay.
Yeah, you got to go. Chief Bashoor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
Thank you, Chief.
Yep, thanks. And you can keep rolling, obviously, with these guys, but if I don't pick my wife up when I said I'm going to pick my wife up, this will be the last podcast I do, I guarantee you.
Thank you so much.
See you, Chief.
All right.
Chief Costa, as we talk about some things here, and we're going to wrap up as well because I value your time. And what about you? Call to action beyond what what they've said?
Yeah, I'm just going to add, if it's 60,000 people a year, was I believe what you said earlier, somewhere around there.
Sorry.
Yeah, think about the impact that those 60,000 a year can have on social media. I'll just throw social. I mean, that's obviously I have a heavy presence in that area, but I think we saw how much impact these podcasts and how social media outreach can work. And I just ask those people that have had these wonderful experiences that I've had, even at minimum, make their voice known. Don't take this place for granted. It could go away. And I think the fire service in general takes a lot of things for granted, and we just think it's here and it's always going to be here, and that may not be the case. So speak up, be loud. I just wrote a little open letter, just kind of my thoughts about some things. I'm going to put that out in the internet, probably in the next couple of days. So that's, just do your part. There's a lot of us out there that can do a little that equals a lot. That was it.
Excellent. Dr. Onieal, a closing thought, and then I think we'll wrap up if that works for Chief Costa as well. But we'll have Dr. Onieal close us out here. What do we got?
Well, first, I want to thank Chad and Marc for their contributions. That just they have such tremendous influence in the media, both of them in different ways, and that is what will make us a success. The other thing I would just want people to understand. People may think that the National Fire Academy isn't going to go away. I've seen things go away in the federal government. Important things go away in the federal government. And this is something that we have to take on as a fight. Not an obnoxious fight, but to make sure that our elected and appointed officials know how we feel. And I have a little bit more fear about losing the National Fire Academy than perhaps my colleagues, but it could happen. I just want to assure people it could happen.
Dr. Onieal, from me and probably tens of thousands of people, thank you for your hard work through all the years from 1995 on to make the National Fire Academy what it is. And I know your predecessors did some great work as well. And I know that it sits in a very your successors, thank you. And it sits in a very good place where it is today, or at least it did on Friday morning. And I think we'll be cautious in the next couple of weeks to make sure that we do everything we can do to get it back there. With that, I thank you, Dr. Onieal, for joining me. Assistant Chief Costa, I thank you. I thank Chief Bashoor for being on earlier. And I encourage everyone to do something, to share something, to spread the word, to make sure they reach out to their elected officials. And again, I thank all of you for joining us as we talk fire and as we talk the National Fire Academy. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Good seeing you.
Thank you.